Most people think of fulfillment as a ladder that you climb, and the higher up that you get, the more success you experience and the more fulfillment and purpose you feel. But what if instead it's more like a pot that you fill up until it overflows into the lives of others? Well, what we're going to do in this video is explore Maslow's ideas of self-actualization, but view it from a different perspective, how it flows outwards rather than climbs upwards. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, explain his ideas first and his famous hierarchy of needs pyramid. Then I'm going to go over an alternative and I think a more functional way of looking at it, which is this idea of the overflowing pot. And then I also want to give you a couple of book recommendations, as always, if you'd like to take this further. And this entire video was prompted by this wonderful little diagram here, which I found in this book, which is The Unfolding Self by Molly Brown. As soon as I saw this, I thought, yes, this all makes so much more sense now, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. So I hope that you'll enjoy this too. Right. First of all, very, very briefly, let's go over Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, Maslow created this pyramid to illustrate and explain the basic needs that need to be met in a healthy and fully functioning human, and how one need emerges from the lower one being met. So, I'll go through an example of what this means in a moment once I've actually labelled them. So, the basic explanation of each of these levels is, first of all, at the bottom, you have got the physiological needs. So this is things like water, food, shelter, sleep, and so on. And out of those, we get the safety needs. So these are things like employment and physical health and personal security just in general. Now, out of those, you also then get the belonging needs. So that is things like friendships or family relationships, just connection in general. Out of those, we then get to self-esteem needs. So this includes things like respect, not just for yourself, but from others, as well as recognition and achievement. And then you also get self-actualization needs, which are things like purpose and fulfillment and morality and creativity, anything like that. And then above the actual pyramid itself, or if you like, the real cornerstone of the pyramid, which is missing from quite a lot of diagrams, are what I'll refer to as self-transcendent needs. So I'm just going to draw this just above the pyramid itself. So these are things like being of service to a community or contributing to something greater than yourself, helping others achieve their individual potential and so on, things like that. So I've not given an exhaustive list there of what each of these levels refer to, but hopefully these just give it a bit of a clear example as to what actually counts for each level. And remember when I said before that one need emerges out of the other one being met? Well, this makes it a little bit easier to visualize. So what this means is that once physiological needs are met, then safety needs emerge out of those as the next layer to prioritize meeting. And then you meet those, and then questions of belonging start to arise, and so on. So when in doubt, it's always preferable to focus on the lower rung of the pyramid, closer to the base, because that'll provide steady and stable foundations to then build on. Otherwise, any development is going to be based on really, really shaky foundations, which obviously isn't ideal when life throws its tests at you. So there's no point questioning and prioritizing something like creativity and fulfillment if you don't have shelter or a regular source of food, because it'll just be unsustainable in the long term. Satisfy that first. Solve the deficiencies first, and then look at optimizing who you are trying to become, to use the language of Maslow. So what we're looking for is stable growth. Now, the potential limitation of viewing this as a pyramid model is that it runs the risk of minimizing the importance of self-actualization compared to physiological needs if this isn't read and understood correctly. Self-actualization could easily be misinterpreted as just like the cherry on the top, without realizing that what Maslow is saying is that fulfilling your own potential, so self-actualization, is a basic need. It's not just a nice little pursuit if you've got the time, it is absolutely essential. Also, the diagram, which is commonly drawn, has self-actualization as the cornerstone or the top of the pyramid, which leaves out the importance of self-transcendence for the average person who isn't really studying this kind of material. So what I'm going to suggest instead is a complementary angle of viewing this exact same hierarchy, but with an emphasis on making this inner work practical. And this isn't a criticism of Maslow at all. He's an absolute genius, and I just want to make his incredible ideas just more and more practical for everybody. So here is the analogy of the overflowing pot. Imagine that we want to make a stew, or for my fellow northerners, a hot pot. So firstly, what we're going to do is to add to the pot is to look at the stock and the water. This is the very basic starting point. So we'll put that down here, which we'll then add to. Then we can start cutting up the potatoes, and this will help to thicken up the stew and to serve as a basic fundamental starting point, which we can then build on for the stew. And a stew that is just stock, water, and potatoes is clearly on the way to becoming a stew, but it's not there yet by any stretch of the imagination. Then we can start adding the rest of the veg. That might be carrots, turnips, the spinach, the onions, whatever it is that you want to add that will make this stew and give it more taste, to make it more nutritious. And then our fourth step would be then to add in any finishing touches, just to make the flavour specific to how we actually want it. So we might add in salt or pepper or herbs, spices, anything just basically to season it to our taste. Now we put it on the hob, leave it to cook for the next 2 hours, and then there we go, 2 hours later, amazing, we've got a lovely meal to serve up in a bowl. The only thing left to do then, obviously, is to enjoy that meal, maybe reflect on how you might creatively make a change to the recipe next time, but that's about it. Except, that's not the only thing left to do at all. We've got to ask ourselves, what would make this experience even better? Well, you've made a pot full of stew and you've served yourself a single bowl. There's still a lot left in there to go around. So perhaps it would be even better if you invited some friends round and served them the rest of the food. You can use the remainder of the food not only to satisfy yourself, but also those around you. And maybe in return, you'll be invited to one of their dinner parties in the future. So suddenly, one simple bowl of stew has become so much more than what it looked like at first. It's an opportunity to connect with others, to join a wider community, to potentially receive far more than you've actually given. And hopefully you can start to see where I'm going with this analogy of the overflowing pot with regards to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. By reimagining the pyramid as a bowl, it helps to place more focus on self-actualization and self-transcendence. So physiological needs absolutely must be prioritized first. That's why the stew began as stock and water. In practical terms, no one would consider their lives complete by simply having access to food, shelter, and water, and that's it. And similarly, the stew wouldn't be particularly great if it was just stock and water. But with the foundation of physiological needs in place, safety needs can then start to safely emerge from this, and then belonging needs can follow, and then self-esteem needs can follow on from that, following through to self-actualization needs. Likewise, once we've got the water and the stock, we can then start adding the potatoes, and then the rest of the veg, and then the seasoning. But there's no point prioritizing the seasoning if you haven't got access to water and stock, well, water for the stock, in the first place. So these levels emerge naturally from each other. And once the lower level is satisfied, once the basic need is met, then focus can be placed on the next rung of the ladder. We can choose to descend that ladder whenever we wish, but it needs to be in place first. So, for example, I might be focusing on my self-esteem needs at any particular point in my life, but I could always then go back and choose to upgrade the quality of the food that I'm eating, or move into a bigger house, change my career, anything else like that. So in the same way, once I've added all the potatoes, all the veg, all the seasonings to the recipe, I could then taste it and go back and add more carrots if I wanted to. But ultimately, the question is, with all of this, what are we becoming? Or what are we creating? Not just for ourselves, but also for others. And this question itself is going to look different and sound different depending on where we are on the pyramid at that point in time. But over time, we are looking to still ascend this. We just update our questions and the answers that we are looking for all the time, depending on how far up we've actually climbed. And page 18 of that book that I referenced earlier, it makes the point really, really clearly with a lovely simple quote. We never become self-actualized, only self-actualizing. We never simply create one pot of stew and are then satisfied for life. We need to create the stew, eat it, enjoy it, share it with others if possible, and then begin creating another one as soon as it is relevant. Likewise, we shouldn't assume in our lives that we can just simply reach self-actualization and just remain there statically. This is a process, not a destination. It's a verb, it's not a noun. You are self-actualizing as a practice, not being self-actualized as a permanent state. And that's another bonus of viewing this pyramid as an overflowing pot instead. So this pot is open-ended, and it can overflow into the community according to the size of the pot that you decide to actually make use of a recipe like this. This is where self-transcendence comes back in, just to make that nice and clear as to how this would all fit in. So the size of the stew is satisfied firstly by that stock and that water, and then from there the appropriate number of potatoes to add emerges from what we understand the limitations of our cooking equipment to be in the first place and our access to ingredients and so on. Just as in our lives, the capacity for self-actualization and self-transcendence ultimately rests on our physiological needs being met first, and it emerges as a natural evolution as we scale that pyramid. I don't want to over-explain this analogy, so I'm going to leave it there because you can probably see what intuitively comes up with you for you as you maybe hear some of these words. But if you do want to take something like this further, I do have 3 books for you to explore. Just before I do that, I do want to offer one final quote just before I mention them. And it comes from page 17 in the first book that I'm going to recommend. Just down here. Unfortunately, survival often becomes an end in itself, and the behaviours at one time necessary for survival persist long after the adverse conditions have passed. Survival behaviour becomes the goal rather than a means for providing an environment for self-expression. It's this absolutely wonderful quote. By all means, go back and just replay that if you feel like you need to, or just read it for yourself. But it's this wonderful quote, and it helps to provide the context between what are called deficiency-oriented values and growth or being-oriented values, to use, again, Maslow's terminology. So this quote comes from the book The Unfolding Self by Molly Brown. It offers a really practical way to combine human growth potentials and psychosynthesis and counseling, as well as links to spirituality as well. And I found this particularly useful. If you wanted to dive into Maslow's work for yourself, then I've mentioned this book before already on the channel, but I would suggest Toward a Psychology of Being. It's written in a more technical and a more precise way compared to that first book, but it is still very accessible. The last chapter in particular, starting on page 142, is super, super useful, and it gives you lots of propositions to consider just to help guide you towards that path of self-actualizing. Those deficiency-oriented values and being values that I mentioned a second ago, they are talked about in here in some good detail as well. And if you are interested in the self-actualizing and the self-transcending parts of Maslow, then what I would then suggest as well is his follow-up book to this, which is The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. So start with Toward a Psychology of Being to see the bigger process, and then this lovely little book will just help to take those top elements of the pyramid just that little bit further. And then just as a little bonus extra, actually, while I'm here, I have also recommended this book many, many, many times on the channel, but I'm going to mention it again just because it is, again, super relevant. It's this little book by James Hollis called Creating a Life. It's relevant again here. I've already done a really long 26-minute deep dive exploring this and how to practically use it if you want to develop your psychological maturity. So I will leave a little link to that as well just underneath. But all these topics and all these videos link together. So just start wherever it feels most appropriate for you. All right, that's the analogy, that's the explanation, that's the book recommendations, and all those original sources for you to explore yourself. Self-actualization and self-transcendence for me at this point of time in my life is all about creating my library of psychology and philosophy books and then teaching about the insights which can be gleaned from them. So all whilst encouraging you to read these books for yourself. That's how I'm putting all of this into practice at the moment, and it'll update over time. Let's just see where this goes. All right, I'll see you in another lesson and see you soon.